Let's start with the next topic, that is crops for Europe. So when the Britishers, they were handed over the Diwani of the Bengal, and when they were the chief economic administrator of the area of Bengal, when they were procuring revenue from the peasants and the artisans of the Bengal, soon they realized that not only Bengal could grant them the access to revenue, but Bengal could also be a source of crops which was needed in Europe. So, what is there in the crops for Europe? What was there that the Britishers needed for fulfill the demand of certain things that were required in Europe that could make access to more profit, to a more profitable income. So let's see what is there in crops for Europe. Now, crops from India. Certainly, the British, they wanted to expand their profit sourcing from the Indian economy. Basically, that time they not only just wanted to explore the revenue areas, but they also wanted to explore the production areas, the crops production area, where they could produce crops which was required, which could suffice in more and more profit over a period of time. These crops were two of a kind. First in the option was indigo, and second, opium. Now, they wanted to expand the cultivation of opium as well as indigo and the other crops as well. Basically, the Britishers, when they thought that, okay, I can expand the production of some other crops as well, which could fetch them more profit, they started, in West Bengal, they started they started making peasants cultivate jute. Then in some other parts of India, like Uttar Pradesh, which was then known as Central Province, we should always remember that some of the areas, they have different names than from now. So basically, the state of Bengal, they started producing jute crops there. Then in the state of United Province, they started producing sugarcane there. Then some of the other areas of the south were prone to producing, cotton. So basically, all these areas were, then Assam, the tea plantation was being cultivated. So Britishers, they forcefully, you may call it forcefully, or they coercively tried to produce some of the other farmings which could make them more profit. That is a very interesting fact, if you must all know. In geography also, you will have to study about this. Now, it's just a comparison that I've drawn between, then and now, that those crops that Britishers then coerced people to produce are the crops which are the highest producing crops of that area. Like West Bengal is the highest producer of jute. Then Uttar Pradesh is the highest producer of sugarcane. Then accordingly, we have in South India, we have Tamil Nadu and various other, then Assam has tea plantations. So of course, it has been coming from that time itself that these areas were more good for certain crops, and those crops we also gained profit from. So at that time, the Britishers might not know that Indians would also gain a profit, or Indians would gain independence as well. But eventually it benefited us as well. So how they wanted to expand the cultivation of opium as well as indigo. Indigo. So India was the biggest supplier of indigo in the world. The demand for Indian indigo was much, much higher than all the other indigos that were produced. That was because indigo was produced in a certain temperature, and India's climate was very, very suitable for the cultivation, for the production of the indigo. Indigo gave a very rich color, a very rich blue color. The Indian indigo gave a very rich blue color, which was in demand throughout the European as well as the whole Western market. So basically, the other indigo that were produced in the France or in Spain or in Britain itself, it was not of that quality. It was usually very dry and gave a very faded color. It was named as woad. These were the indigos that were produced by France and Britain and many other kingdoms, but these were coming from a tropical climate. So basically, these could not produce a very rich color. But the Indian indigo had a very, very rich color, had a very dark and deep color, and it was much, much in demand. Indian indigo was used by cloth manufacturers in Italy, France, and Britain to dye clothes. At that time, during the vast this production of the textile industry, it was at growth, and for dyeing purposes they needed indigo. Although all other indigo were there in the market, but Indian indigo was more in demand because it could fetch that kind of color. These are the two examples. This is the Kamalkari print, which was there in Andhra Pradesh, and this is known as the Morris print. You will notice that both have this blue color, but this blue color is richer in appearance, and this is a slightly faded version. So basically, why Indian indigo had much demand, it also had a huge profit because it could be produced in a very less quantity, and then when it was exported, since the quantity was less, the price was very high, and since it was in a great demand, so basically it was in great demand and the quantity was less, so the price was very high. So the Britishers, they thought that this way they could have more profit, they could gain more profit over some of the areas that they could explore in India. So basically indigo plantation for them in India would fetch them a very great profit. Why the demand for Indian indigo? Because of the vast industrialization, as I said earlier, because of the vast industrialization taking place in England, the textile industry gaining boon, there was a need to dye the clothes. And for dyeing purposes, the faded wood indigo was not of that quality, did not produce that rich kind of quality, whereas the Indian indigo produced a very rich blue color. That is why it was in mass demand. Fall in the supply from West Indies and America. So during that time in West Indies and America, this abolition of slavery was going on. Because of that, and because of various other reasons, the supply from both these countries, it stopped. Not just stopped, it prohibited, and over the time it became very less. So it could not fetch the demands of the market. So basically Indian indigo was then very much in demand, and British thought that it was a great opportunity to expand their trade in indigo sector as well. This is a picture of the slave revolt of Saint Domingo in the Caribbean island. So at that time, a lot of places were seeing revolt against the slavery. So because of that, many regions which saw the slavery, which saw the rise of the rebel because of the slavery that was being practiced there, the supply for indigo, it fell drastically because all these people, they were involved in revolt, and some of the other regions, they saw the abolishment of slavery. That was a good news. But the demand for indigo was getting high and the supply of indigo was getting low. Now the Britain now is turning to India because the demand is very high, and I know that I can produce. I have a country which I am trading in, and I own a place there. Like, I am the divan of that place. I am in charge of the economic administration. So basically I could make them do indigo plantations and indigo production, and that way I can gain more profit. So Britishers, they thought that they would cultivate huge amount of indigo from India, and then they would sell it to the Western markets, which could fetch them huge profits. So the imports from India went from 30% to 95% in less than 30 years. So basically it was a very huge profit for the Britishers. But what are the implications that were there other than the Britishers? Like, Britishers were not the only one who was involved in the process. There were producers of the indigo, then there was farmers, there were peasants, there was zamindars. What happened to the Indian economy? Did it also gain a profit because of the huge profit of the indigo plantation? We saw about opium plantation, but our syllabus does not says much about opium. British people, the East India Company usually used to sell opium to the China, and they used to buy very luxurious items from there in exchange of the opium. So opium was in great demand in Chinese market, and the British, they used to produce opium from India, and then they used to sell it in Chinese market in exchange for luxury goods like porcelain cups and silk and many other items like textile also. This is the video in which we can see, the dye, the indigo color, and how it produces a rich dye. Now, how was indigo cultivated? this is a very important thing, that how the indigo was actually cultivated. There were two systems which could cultivate the indigo, that was niche and roti systems of the indigo cultivation. Now we have to remember that even before the system, the Britishers, they tried to, try all the means and methods to have everything in their power to increase the production of anything which could fetch them profit. This was, interestingly, this was, pressed upon because it could fetch a whole new market, a whole big market for the Britishers. And that time it was in demand because of the vast production of the textile industry. So the niche and roti systems were true systems of indigo cultivation. We'll see one by one from each. First, before the problem with niche cultivation, we should know that what was the niche cultivation. So in niche cultivation, the Britishers, basically the planters who were there, who wanted to have a plantation of the indigo cultivation, they owned a land. Some of the officers of the British East India Company, they also left their jobs and they came in this production business because indigo production was at that time giving huge profits. So whatever money they had, they owned a land, they owned a piece of land, or whoever the planters were who owned a piece of land, they started producing indigo there. They started producing indigo but the land they owned was in a very small piece. So basically indigo needed a huge space to produce more, of course, to produce more, but they owned a very small piece, and that was also in shreds. So one area was here, one was here. So they needed to buy a huge piece of land to have a huge production of indigo, which could fetch them profit. But they owned a very small area of lands. Some of these they owned land, some of these they were taking as a lease from several of the zamindars. So basically, not all the planters they owned land. Some of them they also took it as a lease from the zamindars. But there were several problems which these people faced. That is, indigo could only be cultivated on very fertile lands. Like, it needed a very rich kind of soil which could have a great fertility property. So not all kinds of soil could have a proper balance to produce indigo. Some of the very fertile and rich lands only could produce indigo, and not all lands were fertile in nature. Planters needed large area in compact blocks to cultivate indigo plantation. As I already said, a large land was needed to produce more and more quantity of indigo, but they were not having very large kind of lands. So basically, very small plantation of indigo could happen in the niche cultivation. Labor and equipments in large number were needed. Of course, when you have a large area to produce, then you also need a large kind of labor to have to be working in that area. But this niche cultivation, since they were British officers and they were very new to this kind of system, they could not procure labor that easily. They took lands and they took this niche cultivation, but it was not easy for them to procure the labor from the locals. So that is why large equipments, the need for the large equipments and large amount of labor was not fulfilled in this cultivation. Now the roti system. What was different from in roti system than the niche cultivation was, in niche cultivation, the owners were there. The owners of the land, they used to cultivate indigo on their own plantations. They used to cultivate, or they used to lease out land from the local zamindars. But in roti system, the planters, they forced the ryots, like all the ryots that were there in the area, like there are several ryots that are there in the area. So all the planters that are there in the ryot area, the Britishers, they used to force those people to sign a contract or agreement to use at least 25% of the area for the indigo cultivation. So no matter how much land you have, let's imagine you have a small piece of land, or you might have a large piece of land. In both the cases of those land, you have to cultivate in that 25% of the land you own the indigo plantation. They used to force people to sign this. That was the only choice they were given. And sometimes the headman of the village headman which was there, he was made to sign these contract on behalf of those ryots. So basically, the people initially, they were very forced to be in this kind of system. They were reluctant. The people in first, they were reluctant, but they were promised to be given a kind of loan money. So basically the Britishers, they thought they were given what were the terms and circumstances they put were that you cultivate on 25% of your land indigo plantation. We will give you seeds, we will give you money to cultivate and everything. We will give you that as a loan. You have to cultivate, you have to take care of the plant, you have to then take them out, and then you have to sell it to us. So not sell it to us, you're growing it for us. So basically that is going to happen. Now the people, in the greed of money, in the greed of loan money that they could have, they agreed to this system. But subsequently it cost them a lot. Now what were the problems with the Rayoti cultivation of the indigo? Planters insisted on growing indigo on the best soil, which were essential for the cultivation of rice. Now, there was a parallel scenario which was going there. Like on one hand, the Britishers, they wanted to plant the indigo plantations, but the Rayots that were there, they were used to producing rice. Rice was a staple for them, and rice also fetched them a good kind of profit in the market. Basically, they thought that rice was a basic necessity, and it was needed to be produced more. So they wanted to produce rice, not indigo. But the Britishers, they forced them not to produce rice and produce indigo. They could produce indigo also on the 25% of the land. But the thing was, whenever the cultivation of rice was going to happen, like the harvesting season of the rice, then the harvesting season of the indigo also used to take place. So basically both the cultivations used to clash. So they were very unsure that what kind of importance should they give to the indigo and rice cultivations. That happened. Also, indigo was it needed a very fertile and rich kind of soil. So basically wherever it used to get planted, it used to take all the minerals, all the fertility of the land. It used to make the land barren for the future purposes. So if subsequently I am producing indigo year after year, at the end of 5 or 6 years, my land would become barren for any cultivation, for cultivation of rice, for cultivation of any other crop. So that is why also the Rayots were a bit hesitant in producing indigo. Low prices for indigo led to an endless cycles of loan. So they thought that they were getting seeds from the planters themselves. They were getting loans from the money lenders. But initially it was a boon for them that, okay, we are getting loan. It would not be that much hard. But eventually when they found out that the Britishers, they were buying indigo from them at a very cheap price, then they were not very much interested in producing indigo in that quantity, because it was not fetching them profit. It was fetching the Britishers profit. As cheap as they could get it from the Indians, the more they could, the higher the price they could sell it in the Western market. So basically they were not willing to give a very high price for the indigo cultivation to the Indian cultivators. The indigo production process. Here is the picture which shows an indigo factory and indigo ready for sale. The production used to take place in several steps. Like first the indigo was cultivated, then it was, the seed, the indigo seed, it was grown. Then basically it was a very long and very drying process. And Indian indigo was best in nature because it produced a very, very rich quality. The Blue Rebellion. The Blue Rebellion, the name here represents indigo. Indigo was blue in color. So the Blue Rebellion means the Indigo Rebellion. What happened in the Blue Rebellion? What made these Rayots, what made these peasants go for a rebel? Why they couldn't make the Britishers agree to their demand? What kind of exploitation did they suffer that they had to go for a rebellion? Let's see what happened in that. In March 1859, thousands of Rayots in Bengal refused to grow indigo. Now, this date is very important. Why is it important? If you remember, then the first war of independence, that is the Sepoy Mutiny, it happened in 1857. So the Britishers, they had just now seen a rebellion that was very, very hard to suppress. A mass rebellion that took place and that shook the British core. That, okay, these people, they could also grow into rebellion. It had destroyed a lot of things that the Britishers had. So basically, it had destroyed a lot of parts, it had destroyed a lot of areas, it had destroyed a lot of warehouses. So the war of 1857, although the Britishers they won, the consequences of that war was not very good on them economically, or just domestically. They were harmed at a great extent. So basically this time they did not wanted another rebellion from the peasants. March 1859, thousands of ryots in Bengal refused to grow indigo. What were the conditions? What were the kinds of things that was contributing to this rebellion? Before we see that what the Indigo Commission held, let's see that what happened actually in the Blue Rebellion. So people, when they started thinking that okay, our land is basically becoming infertile because of this indigo plantation, we are not getting, so basically their land was getting infertile. They were selling it very cheap. They were not getting any profit at all. They were burdened with loans. And also, it was the time when the synthetic dye was also in use. Synthetic dye was coming in the market, and because of that, the Britishers, although they were buying the products at the same rate, they were not giving out the same kind of money. The money which they used to get from selling the indigo cultivation of India in the foreign market, they used to give, in that comparison, they used to give to the indigo cultivators a very, very less price, and that was making them not very enthusiastic about growing indigo anymore. So basically it also dried their land, it also drained their land of all the nutrients that they could have. The rice cultivation was taking a hit because of it, and rice cultivation was more prone in these areas because it used to be their staple as well. It used to be their staple food. So they were not willing to shift from rice cultivation to the indigo cultivation that much. A commission was set up to see what kind of things that are happening in the indigo cultivation, that people are growing up to rebellion. The English East India Company, they did not want another rebellion, as I just said. In 1857, they already saw a rebellion. So basically, this time they were trying to suppress the rebellion, any kind of rebellion that was going to happen, because they were not ready for another rebel. So the commission held the planters guilty. Of course, they were guilty because they were just taking the profits. They were not getting much attention to what kind of things that the indigo planters actually required, that the indigo cultivators require, and criticized them for coercive methods. The methods of coercion were also there, like they used to force these people to plant indigo on the 25% of the land that they owned. So that was also a coercive measure which should not have happened. It also gave ryots the right to refuse to produce indigo in the future. This happened after so basically the commission, what they thought was that it was really, really important to suppress this kind of rebellion, was because they had already seen a rebellion just now, and it was not very great for them to have any other rebellion.